If anybody's going to tape or do anything electronically, would you please inform the chair? Welcome guests. At this point, we'll have any public comment. This is your opportunity to speak because this is not a public hearing tonight. Okay, we'll move on. New business. Oh, we got to approve the minutes first, I'm sorry. Approval of November's 9th minutes? Do I hear a motion?
With a
Yep.
couple of minor
Go
corrections.
ahead.
Okay, so we've got 2 corrections.
Minor, very, very minor.
Do you want to let us know what they are,
Pardon? Oh,
the corrections?
under new business, the last sentence, that should be 30,000, I believe.
Where are you?
The last line, under new business, number 4,
4.
it's 30,000.
Oh, right. Okay.
So does everyone see
Yep.
that?
Yep.
Okay.
And on the next page, that first paragraph, the second last sentence is not spelled correctly. Point that BFL doesn't.
Okay.
All right, now, is everybody okay with the changes?
I really had to force that.
Now, is there a motion?
I make a motion to accept.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll start with the presentations.
Need to wait till 6:15 or not?
No, we have no, that's why I eliminated that. The Cape Housing Institute. Welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm Jake Coburn. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Community Development Partnership, and my colleague Andrea Aldana, who's our Director of Housing Advocacy at the CDP, are here to talk to you about our application to the Community Preservation Committee for $10,000 in funds to support the Community Housing Institute. And just to give you a little bit of background, the Community Development Partnership is the Lower Cape's nonprofit community development corporation. We have been around for 25 years working to create opportunities for people to work, live, and thrive on the Lower Cape. And we do that through advancing affordable housing and providing affordable housing, as well as nurturing entrepreneurs and supporting small business development in the region. In Harwich, we own and manage 24 units of affordable rental housing, the most notable of which I think is at Thankful Chase's Pathway, a LEED Platinum certified neighborhood for 12 families in West Harwich on the Dennis town line. We also have for years run a housing rehabilitation loan program that I am pleased to report is returning to Harwich this year with community development block grant funds to help low to moderate income homeowners make repairs to their homes. And we have helped a number of small businesses in Harwich grow and thrive through training, technical assistance, and access to capital, particularly for businesses that can't get loans from our local banks. The Cape Community Housing Partnership is an innovative project that we launched in June in partnership with the Housing Assistance Corporation. And it came out of our experience of trying to work on a number of developments of affordable housing. And really coming to the realization that particularly as these projects get more complex, that many of the folks, including Community Preservation Committee members, but also select board members. I'm a select board member in the town of Truro, and kind of watched my colleagues and our volunteer planning board members, zoning board members, housing authority and housing trust members struggle to deal with pretty complicated issues around developing housing and trying to put together a whole host of different solutions to the affordable housing challenges that we have not only here in Harwich but throughout the region. And we really felt that in observing this, that as a region we weren't providing our volunteer elected and municipal officials with the kind of support and expertise and access to resources and training that they need to help solve this problem and be able to do so in a really strategic way. And then in addition, in many of our communities, town staff also really struggle with trying to address the affordable housing issue as well because of the complexity of the issue, but also so many of them, particularly town planners, have a whole host of other responsibilities as part of their job. And so that led us to trying to create a kind of comprehensive strategy that would provide an opportunity to train elected and appointed municipal officials through a housing institute, and as well as to train citizens to be advocates for affordable housing, and then to also do a public and social media campaign to help voters, because of our town meeting forms of government in most of our towns. It really is citizens who are ultimately making decisions about zoning and funding of affordable housing, to really have a better understanding of who the really critical members of our community are. You know, the people who bag our groceries and take care of our elderly and work in town hall, who need affordable housing given the rising costs of housing on Cape Cod. And so I want to turn it over to Andrea to provide a little bit more detail about the project in total, but particularly the Cape Housing Institute, which we're asking the CPC to help support for next year.
Yeah, so as Jay mentioned, the Cape Community Housing Partnership is a three-pronged solution to support the creation of more affordable housing in the region. And the first strategy is through the Cape Housing Institute, and so that's really what I'm focusing on tonight, and is what the CPA funds will directly be supporting. So the Cape Housing Institute launched this year. We just completed our first institute. We were hoping for 40 elected officials to participate in year one from the Lower Cape, and we were able to serve over 70 people. So we've nearly doubled our goal. And we partnered with Housing Assistance Corporation on the entire Cape Community Housing Partnership to offer all aspects of the program Cape-wide. And so for the Cape Housing Institute, we actually had over 130 people participate Cape-wide. So that was very exciting. And so what we were trying to accomplish was to provide an overview of affordable housing and break it down to 6 components that people need to understand in order to form their strategies. So we covered an introduction to affordable housing for people who are really new to the field. We talked about financing and development. We talked a lot about zoning strategies that towns can work on. And over the course of 6 weeks, people both learned some concrete information and also had significant opportunities to work with each other across committees and across towns. And so the feedback that we've gotten so far is overwhelming. 100% of participants who completed the evaluation form have told us that the Cape Housing Institute was either valuable or very valuable, and 100% told us that they would recommend that their colleague attend as well. And we also heard that they need a lot more support. They want the Institute to keep happening. We intend to offer it annually moving forward, but they also need more in-depth information on specific topics. One of the things that we noticed during our first institute is that there is a very broad range of knowledge in the room, and it can be challenging to target our message and the information to such a broad spectrum. But we can deal with that by offering more in-depth training on topics that people are asking for. Another aspect that people brought up was that once you have the information, then what? What's your next step? How do you move forward? How do you find the right person to help you draft an RFP? How do you start working on a housing production plan that's different from the way that most towns have been doing it, to broaden it, to incorporate housing supply strategies across multiple income levels? What do we do next, and how do we do it? And so we're hearing that people wish they had sort of a one-stop shopping place where they can call and say, I'm having a really hard time with X. What do I do? And there isn't really one place that people can call, and so we would like to be able to offer that by offering technical assistance to the towns. So in year 2, we'd like to, again, offer the Housing Institute, improve it based on the information that we have now, and provide probably quarterly advanced level trainings, and then offer further technical support to the towns. So in front of you, you have an updated budget. We submitted it today. We updated this budget to reflect the Housing Institute budget specifically, as opposed to the entire program budget. And we also wanted to reflect in the Town Community Preservation Funds line the full amount of money that we are prospecting, because we have reached out to all of the CPCs in our region asking for funding as well.
I think with that, we'd be happy to entertain questions or comments from members of the committee.
Okay, I'll open it up to the board. Cindy?
No questions.
Dan?
In regards to your budget, I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
You're budgeting $60,091 for consultants. What do those consultants do? Are they trainers? Are they technical advisors?
So those consultants are really can meet a variety of needs, and they're to assist towns with specific needs that they may have. So it could be that the town planner and the housing committee have identified a piece of land that the town owns and want to do a feasibility study about would this be an appropriate site for some affordable housing? And if so, what are the possible scenarios that could be built on that? So that's one thing that those funds could then be applied to bringing a consultant down who's got that experience of doing an analysis on a site selection. It wouldn't apply in the case of Harwich because you have just updated your housing production plan, but other towns might be able to use these funds for help in updating their production plan. Or maybe maybe the town does want to take its production plan, which was just approved a few months back, and really start developing a plan for implementation of the strategies that have been recommended. So we really wanted to try to provide a whole host of possibilities for consultants to meet the needs, just because of our towns are so different, and towns are in very different places in addressing the affordable housing issue in their community.
So are these consultants, are they serving as the one-stop shopping?
Exactly, yes, yeah.
All right, gotcha. And can you just talk to me a little bit about what you mean by overhead?
So in order to make sure that we have an office to work in, and computers to use, and internet capacity, and that's basically keeps this project's contribution to our having an office and the administrative capability to run the project.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Catherine?
I have no questions. I just wanted to say that it was a very well-written application.
Thank you. That's I can't take any credit for that. That's Andrea's.
Great job.
Jim?
Okay, yeah, I just have a few questions. One, so my understanding is that predominantly what these funds would be used for is the training aspect. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I have two questions with regard to that. One, do you either have the commitment or expect the commitment from other towns that you'll also be training?
This is the fun juggling act of this approach, in that everybody is pretty much at the same place in the process. I think this is our fourth meeting before a CPC, because we've applied to all 8 towns on the Lower Cape.
Okay, so
And
you're at least attempting to get.
So yeah, we have applications in. I think we have one town that we have not.
I will say one thing, though.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting that Orleans has actually written the Cape Housing Institute into one of their priority solutions as far as seeking continuing education. So in their housing plan, or the plan that they recently completed, they specifically called us out as saying that this was an important continuing education opportunity for the town.
Okay, thank you. Now, another question I have is, in that you are talking about training town employees, committee members, or active citizens in the town, have you had discussions with the Harwich Board of Selectmen and received the support of the Harwich Board of Selectmen for this activity?
We have not specifically gone to the Harwich Board. However, 2 members of the Harwich Board of Selectmen participated in the most recent Housing Institute. And we had a total of 10 participants from the town that were that participated, both staff and volunteer members that were in the last institute.
Okay, thank you. One more question. From my observation in the town of Harwich, one of the biggest sort of stumbling blocks to the creation of affordable housing is when a project is sort of proposed, the local opposition from the surrounding neighborhoods.
Sure.
What does your organization or your training do to help the town of Harwich and the various committees in the town of Harwich overcome that local opposition?
So that's a great question, and there are a couple different pieces. So as Andrea and I were saying, there are 3 components of this larger project. We're only asking you to support one piece, and that's the Housing Institute. And part of that is because the other components are around training citizens to be advocates and doing a public media campaign. And it was our feeling that those are probably a gray area in terms of being eligible for CPC support. And so that's why we haven't come to you. But the overall project in the Housing Institute, we did address, as one of the modules, how to work on building support. That is certainly something in providing technical assistance to the towns that we could help them with. How do you do an education campaign, or how do you do an effective community engagement process on a specific project? But then we will be through the larger project, using other funding sources, doing a training for citizens who want to advocate for affordable housing, but they've never had the experience of going to a public hearing or a planning board hearing or a zoning board hearing and find that really kind of scary and terrifying, or standing up and speaking at town meetings. So that's what the advocate training is designed to do, is to develop the skills and expertise of people who want to be involved, but really don't necessarily understand how that whole process works, and help them engage in that. And then the third component of the project, the public media campaign, is really designed to put a face on who the people are in our community that need affordable places to live. And I think that will kind of help address the very real challenge that not only is here in Harwich, but in other towns across the Cape face the same challenge as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I have.
Joe?
Thank you. I want to build on what Jim was just asking. In your original budget, you talked about the public media campaign, and you had the $15,000. But what we have tonight, it's not there anymore, so where did it go?
So we are going to still do it, conduct that campaign, and we have received other funding on a larger project. The reason that we pulled it out is that we got some feedback and questions from some of the other towns about whether that was an eligible CPC activity. Because there were some towns that were expressing concerns that, in the different criteria that's in the Community Preservation Act, support of community housing, and there are some pretty specific examples of what that means around building the capacity, or or paying for consultants, and I think we felt that the idea of the public media campaign was a little bit gray area, and so rather than put you guys in a position of having town council wondering whether you could fund it or not, we're just going to fund it from some other funding sources.
So let me try my question again.
Sure.
The budget we have tonight is almost $19,000 higher.
Yeah.
But you've taken out the $15,000.
Right.
Is that going into consultants? How have you reallocated?
So
Because your overall budget's up.
So there are 2 factors. One was, when we prepared this budget, we had not done the community housing, or we had not done the Housing Institute yet, and so we learned by doing that once what the actual costs were. We also had not really fleshed out the cost of doing some continuing education training in between. So that's why we made some of the changes to that budget.
And then finally, when you're talking about reaching out to other towns, I think you said 8 towns altogether.
Yep.
Are you asking them for all the same commitment, or you?
Actually, we've been asking the other ones for more.
Strike the question, thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
And that was the benefit you had by being having the first
Go.
deadline, so, yeah.
Yeah, no one heard that, so we're good.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
Thanks.
May I add a comment? I do believe the Housing Institute has been proposed to the Board of Selectmen through Housing Assistance Corporation. I don't know what what the Board of Selectmen's take is, but it has been presented to the BOS.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, the Harwich Housing Authority application. Welcome,
How are you doing tonight?
doing well.
John Stewart, the Director of the Housing Authority. I went to the Housing Institute, it was wonderful, I just want to throw that plug in for them. We are looking for $400,000 to do another round of buy-down. It would be $125,000 per house for 3 houses, and the other 25 for admin fees. Pretty straightforward.
Okay, I'll open it up for the board. We'll start with Joe this time.
The only question I have in your application, you say another round, is that what the 2013-14 $75,000 was for?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
yes, this started in 2009.
Jim?
Yes, as usual, I have a few questions. Let's start off with, in your application, you said that you were proposing to do the buy or buy down 3 houses.
Yes.
Have those been identified?
No, what they do is they have a lottery, and then the winners of the lottery then go out and buy houses off the open market. They have to buy in Harwich.
Okay. If the lottery selects the buyers, prior to knowing what the houses are and what the prices of the housing is, how are you assured that with the $125,000 per home is going to reduce the level to an affordable level?
I spoke with Housing Assistance Corp. They did the lottery for us last time, and in speaking with Gail Kelleher there, we went through the MLS listing and looked at what houses were going for and what it would take to buy it down to an affordable rate, because these will then be deed-restricted properties.
Do you know, can you share those numbers with us?
They were, like, 350 was probably right around what they were looking at, so this would bring it down to 2.25.
And is 2.25 affordable?
Yes,
Is it according to state standards?
yes, it's
Okay.
the high end, but it is affordable.
Yeah, because I thought it was a little bit lower than that.
Yeah,
But,
no, that's right on the edge, but.
okay. Then I guess the only other question that I have is, you indicate $25,000 for administrative costs,
Yes,
but yet I don't see a budget for those administrative costs.
that is, what they do is, like I said, we contracted with Housing Assistance Corp. Basically, they charge 3% of the market rate of the house as a realtor's fee. They do the application process for us, they do the lottery for us, and they actually go out to the houses with the potential buyers and go through them.
Okay, I would still like to
Okay.
see a budget for the
Okay.
$25,000. Is that possible to get us before we finish reviewing applications?
Yes,
Thank you. That's all I have.
okay.
Yeah, no. So in 2013-14, we funded one buy-down, so it's 75,000 for one buy-down.
Yes, it was, Jerry Loftus, I think, put in the request. He had requested 150,000. It was reduced to 75 because there was still just over 70,000 left from the previous buy-down.
Okay,
The
so
Housing Authority then put
so
in the difference
it was
to make it.
combined
Yeah.
for one buy-down?
No, we did
Oh,
two
two.
houses, yeah.
And were any CPC funds, CPA funds used prior to that year for other buy-downs in your
Yes,
town?
in 2009 was the first buy-down.
And how many houses?
They had originally talked about doing 4, they ended up doing 3. There wasn't the funds left to do the 4th, that's where
Is
the
that that American
70,000
Dream
came
thing?
from. That was different,
Okay.
that was separate.
All right. And when you say it's deed restricted, is that for life?
Forever.
Okay.
Yes, and they used the DHCD universal deed restriction, which survives foreclosures.
Dan?
How do you reach out, publicize the availability of these funds, or the opportunity to purchase a house with some subsidy?
It's a huge marketing. They send out flyers, they do emailings. It's a pretty extensive plan. It has to be approved by the state before we can do any advertising to make sure it meets the affirmative fair housing marketing plans.
Okay, yeah. The rest of my questions were covered already.
Okay.
No questions.
All right. And I will get the information and get that back to you. Any other questions?
Cindy, did you?
No
Sorry.
questions,
Actually,
nope.
okay,
Oh,
Mary.
sorry, Mary.
Actually, too, that's
Mary,
okay.
I'm sorry.
You snuck
Maybe
in,
that's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
That's okay. I did sneak in. How do you come up with 125 to be your offset this time versus the 75 last time?
Just because of what the market rate houses are and what it would cost to buy them down. 75,000, it was extremely difficult to find houses, and actually, without the commitment of one of the young ladies' fathers to put in writing the amount of repairs he was willing to do, it would have been, she wouldn't have got the house that she had.
So where does that, so what would you expect the average market rate house to be that would be bought down at 125?
Between 3 and 350.
All right, I have a question. In '09, what was the total amount of money?
In '09. That's
It's all right. Yeah, that might help.
It was $487,928 is what I have.
From CPC funds?
One was, one is dated 2009, I'm sorry, one is 2009, that was 280,000.
And all that money was expended?
In 2009, no, that ended up with the balance of the 70,000. Because they were going to do 4 houses, they only ended up doing 3.
Okay. We're gonna look that up. All right, thank you very,
Well, no, not a question, but just to add, because of with the deed restriction through DHCD, these homes add to the capital A affordable housing stock in the
Yes.
town, which helps us get to our 10%
Yes.
goal. Thank
And
you.
it's nice because they're scattered site and neighbors don't know that they're deed restricted, so there's not in my backyard.
Just one last question.
Mary?
Is there any preference in the lottery for current residents or no?
That I don't know. We are going to try to get one, but because we require them to buy in Harwich, it's difficult to get a preference for Harwich residents.
So potentially it could be open to somebody in Williamstown or western part of the state? Just
I mean,
hypothetically.
Hypothetically,
Yeah.
yes, but
Is
They
there
have to be
any,
able to,
is there a process to try and get the preference through DHCD?
oh, yes, that's part of the
Okay.
marketing plan.
And how
And
long,
it's marketed basically just on the Cape. We don't, in the past, we had to market off Cape, but because we have a more diverse population now, we don't have to advertise as far.
if they, is it a situation that you can seek through application through DHCD to have a preference for Harwich residents, existing Harwich residents first? Or do they not have that,
Yeah, we
ability?
will attempt to do that. Whether
Okay.
they'll let us or not is up to them.
And is there a time frame on that? Typically, well, how long would it take you to hear back from them? Is that post getting the money and then?
It depends who's doing the applications. Last time it took me, it took me over 2 years
Okay.
because there were a lot of staff changes at that level and things just weren't getting done.
And fair housing laws.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
According to my records, Harwich Affordable Housing Town did not pass in 2009. I'll have to look at it. All right,
Okay.
I'll do some research.
As a quick reminder to the board, communications between the applicants and the board members will come through the chair. The next people that are up is the Town of Harwich Affordable Trust Fund, please.
No, I thought it was on Habitat for Humanity.
Oh, it's Habitat?
Yeah, I,
All right,
what are you looking at?
I'm looking at something different.
Okay,
Welcome.
well, thanks, that was a nice welcome, thank you very much. So I'm Vicki Goldsmith, I'm the Executive Director of our local Habitat for Humanity, and Jeff Brown is newly our Land Acquisition and Project Permitting Manager. So we're happy to be here, and we thank you for this opportunity to present our application for $300,000 in CPC funds or $50,000 in funding per home for the development of 6 permanently affordable homes to be located on property to the rear of 93 and 97 Route 28. Habitat received the approval of the Zoning Board of Appeals for this project on August 30th. As described in the proposal, Habitat will construct a road. Now we know it will be named Murray Lane to honor the late Bob Murray, and the road will go into the right of the existing homes as you face the homes. We'll construct 4 3-bedroom homes and 2 2-bedroom homes. Currently, Habitat sells homes of that size for $131,750 for the 2-bedroom and $147,500 for the 3-bedroom. Community volunteers, grants such as from the CPC, and significant private funding from the community allow us to sell our homes at these prices that are truly affordable to families earning up to 65% of median income. So each home will be sold with an affordable deed rider, ensuring that in the future the sale will be at a similarly affordable price, adjusted to tomorrow's dollars, with the sale allowable only to an income-qualified family. So in the application packet that you received, Exhibit F shows the basic layout of the site, and Exhibit G shows home designs, which are essentially a very common and attractive ranch design with a little front porch and a Cape design that you'll see all over Cape Cod. The CPC funding will be critical for this project to proceed as planned. Once the infrastructure work begins, high costs will very rapidly be incurred, building the road, bringing in the utilities, and preparing the home sites. We anticipate this infrastructure activity to take place during the fiscal year that begins July 1, 2018, which is when Springtown meeting approved funds will become available. So our success in garnering an award of FHLBB funding, which you saw in the pro forma, as well as raising the private funds indicated in the pro forma, as well as the construction loan financing that we will need, because a significant amount of the financing in the end is what the homeowners will pay with their USDA mortgages, so we have to get construction financing for that aspect. So all of this funding ties directly to demonstrating the full project feasibility, which will come from garnering this CPC award that we have requested. So Habitat is one of the few organizations on Cape Cod still actively producing affordable homes for first-time home buyers. We have a proven track record, including 12 homes completed in 3 Cape Cod times last year, and 9 homes that we are currently developing in the towns of Brewster and Truro right now. Working in partnership with our local towns, we provide a great opportunity for families who are working in our local economy, in hospitality, healthcare, construction, education, retail, and in some municipal jobs, enabling these families to lift themselves out of circumstances of housing need and insecurity, and to have a permanent and affordable place for themselves and their children in our community. And with that, we will be happy to answer any specific questions you may have.
Okay, I will open up to the board. Kathy, would you like to start?
I was looking at the plans. They all have basements?
Yes, they do.
That's all I had to ask. I read the whole thing.
Hope that was the right answer, but it's the true answer.
I have no questions.
Joe?
No questions?
Dan?
In the report under Habitat Homes, the report says that the ranch homes can be easily adaptable if a buyer/household has a disability that requires accommodation. And I'm thinking of somebody in a wheelchair. How, could you just describe to me how easily it's adaptable? These homes are easily adaptable to accommodate somebody in a wheelchair?
Basically, well, one of the, to me, sweet things about the Habitat process is we select the families before we begin construction.
Right.
So that they can work on the home. So in this instance of a selected home buyer with, let's say, needing true wheelchair accessibility full-time, we can, as needed, actually go back and modify the design and re-permit the house, even it might mean a few months delay. But we've done that in one instance in Brewster. Actually, the selected applicant, we were planning to build a cape, and we had a family where a child was wheelchair dependent, and we went back and re-permitted that house for the fully ADA accessible ramp and so on and so forth. So basically, we just can modify for it.
Is there an additional financial impact because of that on the cost of the home?
There's some financial impact. It isn't huge. The nice thing about our ranch design at this, I mean, the ranch is much easier to modify than than a cape, certainly. And we already design with wider doorways and halls and so forth. So already a lot of the house, we would have to make a larger bathroom more than likely, that kind of thing.
And one other question, just to clarify, for my own edification, you're going to build 6 homes,
Right.
but you've been approved for 8 building lots. So what are those other 2 lots?
For 8 lots, but not 8 building lots. So one is the road and one is common area,
No,
Jeff?
what we have, there are 2 existing structures there. Those are becoming
Oh.
7 and 8 and being handed back to Hetch.
Okay,
Those are existing buildings.
okay,
Right.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you. So I brought them. Okay.
Cindy?
No questions.
Mary?
No questions for me.
Thank you. I should say that also with that ranch design, we consider it a visitable design. So if someone becomes disabled after they're living there, or they need to put in a temporary ramp for someone to come visit or something like that, it's very adaptable.
No questions, just a comment from me. This is one of the most extensive documents I've read submitted to the CPC.
Certainly one of the heaviest.
Is that a positive or comment?
I would think that'd be a positive.
Oh, thank you very much. All right.
Thank you very much
That's
for
it.
coming.
Thank you so much for your consideration.
Now, next, Affordable Housing Trust.
I just have a quick question for the board. I was wondering if you could take my item out of turn because I am waiting for someone from Mass Housing Partnership. I told her to be here at 7, but we kind of whizzed through the applications, and she's an expert in it. So if you could take mine out of order. If not, I completely understand. I'll start going, and when she comes, she can jump in. But I would just request that of the board if it's
Is
possible.
that okay with the board?
We can take like a 10-minute break.
We can if the board chooses. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'm sorry. I
Okay.
really
No, that's
appreciate
fine.
it.
You-
I just
well,
think she'd be a good
You wanna
resource
take
to
a
be here.
2-minute break?
Well,
Or
yeah,
we-
because we don't have anybody else.
All right. We'll take a
Last
10-minute
one.
break and wait.
I really appreciate it.
You're
Thank you.
Okay.
Mary? So I'm presenting the Harwich Municipal Affordable Housing Trust and Part-Time Housing Coordinator. It's also potentially shared housing coordinator, but I'll get to that as we continue the presentation. So I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. The first one I'll start with is the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. So this is allowed under Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 55C. And I did include that in your application packet so that you can peruse the law. But basically, as a summary of it, it's to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in municipalities for the benefit of low and moderate income housing. So that's kind of the summary of the law and the purpose of it. So the 2010 census, it shows that residents are leaving the Cape, and it's mostly because of the cost of housing. It's a major factor. So Harwich's level of affordability is currently 5.4%, and we're state mandated to be 10%, or else we're subject to 40B applications. And we really want to get up to that 10% because then it gives the communities control of where we put affordable housing. Because obviously we want affordable housing close to village centers, walkability, on access routes, bus access routes, things like that. It gives the community more control when we can decide where we want these developments. So it's obviously very important. So what can the trust do? The trust can accept and receive real property. It can purchase and retain real or personal property. It can sell, lease, exchange, or convey, and this is right out of the statute. It can execute deeds, transfers, covenants, employ advisors and agents, borrow money, and manage and improve real property. So it is allowed to, obviously, to have appointments for the trust, and so I'll just go through with some of the members that could potentially be on the trust. So it could be members of the public, so it could be real estate agents or people in the affordable housing community, the town administrator, a member of the CPC, the housing committee, housing authority. So you kind of get all of those brains and mind power and different thoughts together to form this trust. So those are some examples of people who could be on there. My next part is the part-time housing coordinator, which also could be shared. It's shared between different communities. That's something that we are considering. But this person would be the point of contact for affordable housing needs in our community. And it's really a great way to jumpstart the housing effort as well in Harwich. So what would the role of the housing coordinator be? They would mostly be for housing-related programs, projects, and affordable housing initiatives. I know that there are housing coordinators for different towns on the Cape that have just been hired, and they've been very successful in working out there. So, town endorsed plans. So is this something that some of the plans that we already have on the books, is this something that it supports? Yes, it is. So the Harwich Local Comprehensive Plan, it identifies affordable housing projects, funding sources as a goal, and this would be a funding source. Harwich's Housing Production Plan, it recommends hiring a part-time housing coordinator. So that's directly from our housing production plan, and again, it was just adopted a few months ago, so that's important. And it also obviously talks about housing stock and the need to purchase more and create more affordable housing. And the Cape Cod Commission's regional plan, Again, it's to promote fair, decent, safe, affordable housing, to increase the housing stock. So these are all plans that are town endorsed that support both of these requests. So down to the nitty gritty, the budget. I'm requesting $500,000 of CPA funds. The first line would be for affordable housing acquisition on construction of new units, which is $461,500. Program administration salary, which is $30,000. That would be for the housing coordinator. No, this is my fault, thank you. And then I spoke with Yarmouth on the budget because I really wanted to, they have a very successful.
Ellie,
Oh, I'm
could you
sorry,
help
go
me?
ahead.
Would you please introduce your colleague?
Sure, yep. This is, I can't pronounce your last name.
Shelley Gehring.
Shelley Gehring. And she's from Mass Housing Partnership. And like I said, we've met through the Keep Housing Institute, so. it's really
Okay,
great. And
welcome.
she's-
Go
Yeah,
ahead, continue.
she's here to answer any of the more technical details, so. So back to the budget. So I ran this by Yarmouth because again, they have a successful, housing trust and also a housing coordinator. They've created, a lot of affordable housing there, and they're actually going to come present in front of you, I think at the end of the month, if that's correct. So you can kind of hear it from firsthand experience how well this works in different towns. But they recommended that we add program administration, planning consultants, so that's $5,000, and then legal, which is $3,500, because obviously you're going to have to run legal documents through the attorney, so having something in the budget for that is important. So again, the grand total is $500,000, and if you have any questions, please.
Okay, we'll start with Mary.
First question from me, thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you give us an overview of how a purchase would work from the trust? Just maybe the flow of where it starts, how and when you can step in, and how it differs from how we do it now.
Yeah, so how we do it now, so say there was a perfect piece of property on the market that would be perfect for affordable housing. It's right next to the village center, it's privately owned, and we think it would be a great purchase to buy. We don't have any money for it in our stock. We have to wait to come to CPC to request money. But say it's a year later, by the time we come to request money, it's already gone. So this would be a way that we would have money readily available in order to purchase those property. And I don't know if you're asking more about the purchasing side or how.
Just how it would come about, that was exactly what I was looking for, was how you step into the process, as opposed to now where you'd have to wait for either CPC funds or have money in your budget to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that it's very important because not only is it good for what I had just spoke about, buying property that is in private hands, that would be a great location for affordable housing development, but also for a lot of the applications that you've seen in front of you, they waited to come to CPC once a year to gain money, but with the trust, they could have that money available when they needed it if they felt that it was a good project. So that's something to consider as well.
Just one
Mary,
follow-up.
go ahead.
With for example, Habitat for Humanity, could they have made an application if a trust existed, could they have made application through the trust as opposed to coming here for the money?
Yes.
So they could have done that in August when they originally got permitted, as opposed to having to put an application in October?
Correct.
Thanks.
Cindy?
I understand that the Board of Selectmen appoint the trustees. So what's the Board of Selectmen's role? Do they approve, is it the trustees that are going to approve the expenditures? How does that fit?
So we are setting it up that the trustees would be the ones to approve the expenditures. I know that in some towns, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is the Board of they could make the recommendation to the Board of Selectmen and they would approve the expenditures, but we believe that it might make more sense, and I think they do this in Yarmouth as well. You can ask them when they come that the trust is the people who make those determinations.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
So my role at Mass Housing Partnership is to work with trusts around the state and including communities that are interested in or considering a trust. So if, for example, I was in Canton this morning because they're thinking about starting a trust. So the way that the trust statute is set up, and I actually have some copies here if you're interested in that. And it also has, there were some changes made to the trust statute last year, and those are in red, just to highlight those. But it's set up where there has to be a minimum of 5 trustees. One has to be a member of the Board of Selectmen, and the others are appointed by the Board of Selectmen. There can be more than 5 trustees, but there have to be at least 5. And it's set up actually that the trustees make the decisions for the trust. There are powers that are allowed in the statute, and when communities accept a bylaw at town meeting, some communities choose to have certain powers, need the okay of the Board of Selectmen, and other communities just accept the statute as it is. So it depends on the particular community and kind of the comfort level and the interests of the community. Does anyone want this kind of hard
Yes,
copy?
please.
Give it? Mhm.
Just the model that we're
You
trying
can
to
give it to
adopt is
Jan,
very-
she'll make, oh, you have copies.
The model that
Thank you
we're
very
trying to
much.
adopt is very similar to Yarmouth. So Yarmouth has it where the trustees make the decision. A member of the Board of Selectmen is one of the 5.
Thank you.
But that wouldn't be a guarantee, well, how do we ensure, not ensure, but how do we know that that's the model that is gonna stick?
You vote by,
Look, I think that it's a great question, a question that we brought up when we met with the folks from Yarmouth. And what Yarmouth found when they presented to town meeting, and they obviously have town meeting like we do, so they have the similar challenges, that because the money is specifically dedicated for housing and there's limits to what the trust can do, that there's really, all we're doing is making a process going from a more cumbersome process to a more streamlined process. But because it's fairly restrictive in terms of what the trust can actually engage in, it will only be able to engage in those activities directly related to housing.
And what a trust can do matches what is allowable under community housing for the Community Preservation Act, and that was one change that was made to the statute to make those equal. And then all of the restrictions of CPA follow the funds of the trust. So that was another thing that was put into the statute, that all of the restrictions, so for example, section 12 of the CPA statute says that if you use CPA funds to purchase a real property interest, that there needs to be a restriction in perpetuity on the real property interest for which it was bought. So all those restrictions follow the funds to the trust. But also, we always suggest that you of course would have a grant agreement, and so there could be also some language of just making sure that the trust is following the CPA, just reinforcing that. And in some communities, the trust does some sort of planning or action plan and has a sense of how they're going to spend the money, and that's in conjunction with the CPC and the Board of Selectmen and the community. So there also is some of that can be done for some kind of accountability and just openness for the process.
If I may add
Go ahead,
another follow-up
Cindy.
question. I think I'm more concerned about ensuring that those funds that are allocated are actually spent and not voted against, depending on who the Board of Selectmen appoints. I want to make sure those dollars are spent and not withheld.
You mean through town meeting or through?
Well, just with the
Within the trustees.
within the trustees, yes.
I missed the question. I was interrupted.
Well,
Cindy, if I may, I might be able to help. The enabling legislation is who? The state or town meeting?
So the state has the enabling legislation, but the town passes a bylaw creating the trust.
Okay.
So it would be in the bylaw. So in some towns, they just pass the language in the trust statute as it's written. Other communities, and I might have sent some of this to Ally, I'm not sure, take the powers and then they might say that in order for the trust to take on debt or buy or sell property, that some of these powers need to go through the Board of Selectmen. So because otherwise, if that's not in there, then the trust can do any of these powers however they see fit, and it doesn't go before town meeting, and it doesn't go before the Board of Selectmen, and that's the point, to make it more nimble, to be able to respond to the issues in the community housing issues. But there are some communities that do want some of the powers, a few of the powers to go through the Board of Selectmen, the full Board of Selectmen, and that's a local decision. And that's something that they'll just have to think through of how they want to present it to town meeting.
Cindy, anything else?
Not at this time. No, thank you.
Dan?
Can you explain to me a little bit about what this corporate entity looks like? Is it incorporated under Massachusetts law, or is it just a bylaw established through the bylaw of the selectmen?
So there's the bylaw that's passed locally, and then it's also filed with the Registry of Deeds, a declaration of trust as well. So those two things help to establish it.
So there's no corporate certificate registered with the Department of State?
We would fall underneath the town of Harwich. We would be an entity within.
So
It's
it's
a
an entity
municipal
within
entity.
it? Okay.
Entity within it.
It's a municipal entity, so it's bound by procurement laws, open meeting laws, all.
So it's an arm of the town,
Uh-huh.
but not a department?
Just to give you an example too, I included in the packet Yarmouth's declaration of trust that they have actually filed. So if you just want to take a look
Okay.
at your leisure.
And just in general, how do these trusts sustain themselves financially in the long run?
So CPA is the biggest funder of trusts across the state, but there are over 100 trusts right now, and there are about perhaps 80 of them have CPA, so not all of them do. In some communities, some have had friendly 40Bs where there's been some funds that have gone to the trust. Some have, Medfield just created a trust this last spring, and they don't have CPA, so they, at the same time at town meeting, bonded $1 million to seed their trust. There could be different inclusionary zoning, like in lieu of payments that go to the trust. There can be donations. The trust is a municipal entity and it's tax exempt if you donate to it, so there could be land donations or financial donations. Some towns contribute, maybe not cash, but they might make a staff person available to help support the trust. And we would always suggest that a volunteer trust, have some sort of staff support. It's just because it's hard for volunteers to do affordable housing by themselves. So there are a variety of different funding sources that communities are looking at and trying to be creative with. There's a community in Western Mass that's trying to see if some of their hotel tax could go towards the Affordable Housing Trust, because folks that work in the tourist industry have a hard time affording the community. And so the trust is trying to make the case that we should have some of that money so we can be building the kind of housing that employees in the town can live in. So communities are trying to be creative of finding a variety of ways, and not just CPA, but CPA is by and large the biggest funder of trusts. Cambridge transfers 80% of their CPA funds every single year to their housing trust. Somerville transfers 45% of their CPA funds every year to their housing trust. So they send big chunks of money into their trusts every year.
Do these trusts have to register with the IRS?
I don't think so.
I
I don't think so.
I wouldn't think so as a
So they don't-
sub-entity of
It's
the
a
town of Harwich.
Federal ID
entity.
number or anything like that?
Uh-uh.
No?
And usually it's a municipal account with a local treasurer.
So they're not 501s.
One difference is that any money that's in the account at the end of the year stays with the trust. It doesn't revert back to the town. That's specified in the statute.
We were also discussing, just so you know, we do have funds that come from a cell phone tower designated for affordable housing. So that was something that we were considering potentially down the line, is taking those funds and putting them in the trust to help fund that as well.
The Yarmouth model, which is kind of what we're mirroring on, is they actually do get an appropriation each year from CPC to kind of sustain themselves on an annual basis. In any larger projects, they come in with a separate application to seek additional money beyond, let's say, 10% of whatever they dedicated money is.
And that's what, in the application, it does show the projected, and I had requested 10% potentially each year from CPC.
And just since we're kind of on that point, I did attend that Housing Institute as well, and one concept that was floated to the Housing Institute participants, not all, some were presenters, was the idea of actually having, I think with Provincetown does this, where there's a commitment obviously under CPA for 10%, but then you can have town meeting have a will of the meeting to go above, to do an additional 10% or 20% above and beyond. I think some of those towns that were referenced that are in the 45% range had probably a sense that they wanted to go above and beyond if the need is significant. The other thing I just wanted to say, that was one of the notes that was passed, this has been already kind of reviewed and presented. Board of Selectmen has approved this. Housing Authority has expressed support, and the Housing Committee has expressed
Yeah,
support.
saw that.
So we have been through a little bit, making sure we build some momentum. And I do see this as a collaborative effort, quite honestly. I know you have other applications in front of you. If you noticed in the recommendations I made, it wasn't to exclude, it was to include in terms of that approach.
Thank you.
Kathy?
461,500 is kind of an odd amount, so
It's true.
what,
It's true.
like,
Yeah.
what can you do with 461,500
Yeah, so I mean,
realistically?
Yeah, so I think you can do a lot because you, in the Yarmouth model, and please include additional information, they buy the properties and then they are not in the business themselves of building the affordable, the affordable housing units. They put an RFP out and developers come in but you specifically state what you'd like to have built potentially. In the RFP, and developers come in and then they would build it themselves and fund it themselves, but you would be subsidizing that. So it's not like we're going out and building 40 units or whatever it is. We're buying the land, or we're using municipal land as something that we, that would be something that we would be using the funds for. And also I did speak with Yarmouth as well, and they really gave us the $500,000 kind of goal, as they said that I think they were originally allocated, I might be wrong, but 200,000, and they couldn't really start doing anything until they got to that 500,000 mark. So that's why we had requested that much. And the reason why it's 461,500 is because I really thought that we needed to put that program administration, planning, consultants, and the legal in there, just to have, us covered in the budget. So that's the reason.
Okay,
You're all set?
yeah, yes.
Jim?
Okay, I have a few questions. The first question I have is something that Chris had alluded to. We do have, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have a housing authority in town and we do have a housing committee in town. How are these entities going to interact? Do we really need all three entities? It almost seems to me that if the trust were established and were functioning, we might not need the other entities. So could you just respond as to how you see in the distant future what would be happening with sort of the interaction between the three entities?
Yeah, so I think that the housing authority is a shared entity between Harwich and Chatham. So that kind of, you have to set that one aside. But I think that the housing committee is extremely behind this. I go to their meetings, and they were very positive when I presented it to them. The ultimate decision of saying, should we eliminate these committees, is up to the Board of Selectmen, obviously, but I can see it very intertwined, if not
Okay,
most.
but Ally, I think what I was trying to get at a little bit more is, assuming we maintain all three entities, what would the role of each entity be vis-a-vis the other entities?
Can I answer?
Yes,
would
please.
the role of the housing authority change? Would the role of the housing committee change? Would the housing committee advise the housing trust? I just
So the
don't have a
so the
clear
housing au-
picture of how we have three entities that to me seem to be a little bit duplicative if this is established. But if they exist, how would they interact with each other?
So the housing authority really is a separate kind of entity. It's doing voucher programs probably and probably managing units. So that's very different. In some communities, they have a affordable housing committee or partnership. And that committee, they may choose to have a trust and either the committee or the partnership. And the committee and the partnership, a partnership, so yours is a committee. So the committee oftentimes may be advocacy, and it may take a role around kind of advocating for affordable housing and maybe doing some educating around it, whereas the trust is doing more funding development. So in some communities, they've decided to keep both, and they identify separate roles that way. In other communities, they have a hard time staffing both, and so they have brought them into one entity, into the trust, or they've kind of incorporated the partnership or the committee into the trust. And the only cautionary thing with that is if there is something specific that the committee or the partnership, a role that they have that's in a bylaw or charter, or however it's set up, that you just need to talk with town council to figure out how to kind of bring that into the trust. So I think partnerships have some specific kind of rules around reviewing housing proposals or, and so then if that's given to a certain committee, then if you want to incorporate it into the trust, then you would just need to figure out kind of legally how to do that. So like Weston recently has brought their trust and their partnership together into one entity because they were just having a hard time staffing both. But then Medway has a committee and a trust, and they've chosen to keep it separate and identify different roles. So it really depends on the community and what makes the most sense in your town.
Okay. Now, another question I have is the budget number you came up with. You said you came up with it because of the experience of Yarmouth. In that this is a new sort of operation for the town of Harwich, would it be reasonable to at least start with a lower budget number? Because I would assume that if that gets spent out, you'll be coming back next year, for additional funding from CPC as one of your main funding sources.
So our hope would be that you would continue, if you support it this year, that you would continue to support it throughout the years to come. And the reason, again, why I consulted with, because $500,000 is a lot of money, obviously. Right. And I was concerned that it was potentially too much money to be asking, but they really stressed that they could not, and I understand that it's a new program, but they couldn't do really a lot at all until they reached that 500,000 mark, and that was the reason, their rationale, why their recommendation to me was that $500,000.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you my concern here. This would be a new entity. It may take a while to get itself started. It may take a while for it to identify properties or whatever and how it wants to operate. Which leads me to question the ability to spend out the $500,000 in 1 year. And by tying that $500,000 up, we may have to take it away from another project. Now, the other question that I would have is that this entity has not as yet been established by the town. Is that correct?
You're correct, yes.
And that would require a town meeting vote?
It would.
What happens if this money is authorized and town meeting does not vote to proceed with the establishment?
That's a good question. I do understand, where you're coming from, but I think it's so important that we need a trust, something drastic like this, in order to really increase our affordable housing stock. So I do understand the risk that you've pointed out, but I think it's just so important for Harwich that to not, and I also think, on a side, that we do have a lot of community support. We do have a lot of engagement in the community. We do have the support of the Board of Selectmen. We have the support of the Housing Authority. We have the support of the Housing Committee. And I just think it's such an important topic and important going forward that it's something that we really need.
Well, I may agree with you 100%, Ellie. We never know what's going to happen at town meetings.
But could the article for the trust be first, and then the CPA allocations
Yeah,
after
there are
that,
ways
so
of
then you
structuring it
wouldn't
so
do
that.
it first?
But again, the issue that I'm concerned about is even if we can structure it at town meetings so that that's not an issue. You know, the article for the trust first, and then if that doesn't pass, pull the article for the $500,000. However, that's still in the CPC cycle ties up $500,000 from this year's allocations, which is not going to be spent, because we could not reallocate that to another entity without having to go back and get through another town meeting cycle.
Sure.
So that would, in my mind, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, tie up that $500,000 for a year.
I just, a couple points.
Sure, Chris.
Number one, the way I see how we would unfold this, okay, if the entity is formed, let's assume the positive, and then how would we spend the money? If we go and identify a town parcel, then we can then go out and solicit people to come in that meet the criteria and match up their money that they would have through a traditional mortgage with the money that we would have from the trust, and then develop a property. So I think that if we can identify, which I'm very confident we will be able to identify town property, that we can then commence and get going. So I think the question of, it's gonna be how many houses can we attempt to do in any one project? So I think that we will be able to spend whatever money we are given. To the second point that you bring, and I think it's an interesting point, what happens if we don't spend the money? I'd put the onus on you guys. 740,000 sits in the housing bucket now. We haven't been great at spending it. So yes, it is a risk, but I think it's an acceptable risk because now you have an entity that will be able to operate more efficiently and effectively and spend money. And you've been banking money, and I don't mean that, I mean, you can only react to what proposals come before you. So the simple reality is 740,000 has been built up, and it hasn't been spent. I guess the request before you guys is give us the opportunity to bring these resources together, and let's see what we can get accomplished in a year.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, Chris, but I think you're making the assumption that the trust will be approved by town meeting. And my question went to the point that what if
No,
the trust
I
is
understand.
not approved by town meeting? Because then we don't have a trust. And if we allocate this money to the trust, there is no way and the trust isn't created, then there's no way we can reallocate it until the next cycle.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think that's the exact point. If 740, if you allocate a portion to do this and it doesn't go, town meeting doesn't go, then the 740 just grows again, and we have to come back with something else.
But-
So I think it's an opportunity, that's all, but it reverts back.
Yeah, it will revert back, and that's right, Chris, but, as we know, we have more applications this year than we have funding available. So to the extent with regard to this year's allocations, that may be putting money aside that we're taking away from another project that would be ready to go. That was my point.
I would also just to make the clarification as well that there are two requests on the table. It is for the Affordable Housing Trust, but it's also for the housing coordinator,
Right.
which could, not that I want this to happen, but it could be funded, without the trust as well. But I do think that, and again, I think that our need is so great in Harwich for affordable housing that it is a risk that I think is worth it.
Okay, again, I'm not disagreeing with
Right, no,
you,
I
Alex.
understand. I just
And I'm glad you pointed it out, because it may be wise for us, to separate those two issues. And have them as almost like the same application, but like two components of the same application.
And then you can also choose to spend more than 10%
Oh,
on
sure.
housing this year
Oh,
as
sure.
well.
Yes, that's
Doesn't
correct.
just have to
Right.
be 10%.
That's correct. Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Joe, would you mind for 1 second?
I just wanted to address the 700-something thousand in affordable housing. A lot of that is due to returned funds in the last couple of years. Not that we haven't been funding affordable housing projects, but we had a lot of returned funds.
The point was the number.
Well,
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you've presented us with a $500,000 egg, and I think we need to speak about building the chicken, to really mangle a metaphor. The town, it's my understanding, the town has not yet, through town meeting, adopted the statute, correct? The town has not yet begun the process of building the bylaw.
Well, we have the model bylaw, yeah.
We do, but, so, in the spirit of full disclosure, I come here as a member of the Historical Commission, thank you, Mary, but I also happen to serve on the Charter Bylaw Committee, and so there's some work to be done. And I agree with a lot of what my colleague to my right has been saying. So, I'm not prepared yet to even speak to the merits of the application because of all the process that needs to take place. We need to build something within which the trust will work. We need to accept the statute. We need to build, in my opinion, we need to build a bylaw. And these are major decisions that will be made by town meeting. So I think we're looking at, there'll probably be 3 separate articles there'll be the request to accept the statute, there'll be a proposed bylaw, and then, of course, there'll be the CPC question. So I think we can get into it, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, and are there plans to coordinate those three facets for Springtown meeting?
Yes.
Yes, that's what our goal is, yeah.
Okay.
Articles aren't due until, I think, tomorrow, you know, from organizations.
Sure, no, I get that,
So we're in the process of building the warrant.
okay, so I guess where, again, I'm coming from is, as on the charter and bylaw review, we had no expectation that we'd be hopefully looking at an affordable trust bylaw for the town. That's something we can do, but wasn't on our radar. And I think we need to be very clear about that, and I think it fills in some of what Jim has been saying. To switch gears for a moment, if we're gonna work on the assumption that we have an affordable trust board, or trustees of the affordable trust, whatever the heck we'll call it, how many other appointed committees have a legal line item in their budget? Be careful, because I know there's a committee that's gonna want one. Is that, are you expecting that legal line item to fall to the trustees? Or are you anticipating that the town's legal budget will increase by $3,500?
No, you can go ahead, please.
TikTok, right, Ally, sorry.
But I think by the way Yarmouth constructed it, they did, because it's a trust entity, which is almost a separate entity within an entity, that they probably chose to do the legal. To be perfectly honest, as the administrator, you know, I would actually take it out of the legal budget if we needed to get it accomplished. So that item I'm not necessarily married to. I think there's enough legal elements that if we needed to use the town attorney, we could take it out of the legal budget.
So are there other appointed committees that have a legal line item budget?
No.
All right, thank you. So for me, and I understand the previous comments about the one line item about the 461,000. And I think there's any number of ways we can come to different numbers, but overall, I think we need to start talking about the expectation that there are a lot of different moving parts that all have to come together, not just the CPC funding part of it, but a well-thought-out and crafted bylaw that will hopefully be previously voted on the acceptance of statute. But to Jim's question, there's a lot of moving parts to get to, in addition to getting to the overall concept, the merits of the argument, and the dollar amount. Sorry, more editorializing than I expected to do.
Conversations you've already had, maybe? Just reiterate the groups you've already talked to.
Yeah,
and how you're
so
moving
again, my pitch, we have, you know, really laid a groundwork. We have momentum. We've talked to the Board of Selectmen, they're on board. We've talked to the Housing Committee, they think it's a great plan and a really way to get their mission across. We've talked to the Housing Authority, they've supported it. So I think there's a lot of momentum going forward.
And you're gonna talk to the Charter Bylaw Committee.
I know.
That'll be on the list.
No.
Perfect, perfect.
Really, we do send, and even last year, all of the planning board articles, they get referred to the Charter Bylaw Committee. So that is something that definitely is on our radar. So please don't think that we've forgotten you, because it's important.
I do think too, just in terms, I've been in government for a long time, and you know, sometimes I've had people say it takes 30 years, 40 years to get things accomplished. But you know, the one thing that's really, really nice about municipal government is we already talked to Yarmouth. All the legwork that Yarmouth has done, they've already done their trust documents, they have RFPs, they have a lot, and they've already shared it with us.
And they're working documents.
And they're functioning, and they're
Yeah.
successfully
Yeah.
functioning. So this isn't us, to use your chicken and the egg analogy, we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from a successful model that's been in use in a neighboring town.
No doubt. You have a great egg.
We'll be
We need
able
our
to-
chicken.
I think we will be able to move pretty quickly, myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can't top that one. Couple of other questions, though. I was reading, as I'm reading the information, and I'm assuming this is Yarmouth's information that I'm reading, considering it keeps referring back. Exhibit G, the treasurer, or is it going to be the finance director that has control and custodial care of the funds?
So I'm sorry.
It's
I
on,
know you have an example.
it's on page 202 in section G. Exhibit G,
And which part is it in Exhibit
the
G?
very top. It says article, written over, Director of Custodian.
I'm not seeing it, but.
It says the Town of Yarmouth Treasurer shall be the custodian of the trust funds and shall maintain separate accounts, records of said funds.
Yeah,
So is it
I-
gonna
I
be our,
think- I think what they're doing here is they're just saying, like, our water department. Our water department is an enterprise fund, so we do segment off and keep all the enterprise fund within our own accounting system, but it is part of the overall town's accounting system. And I think what they're saying here is that that's what they've done. So they would use, the town of Yarmouth would use their treasurer to be the custodian of funds. We would do the same thing. We'd have the Harwich treasurer be the custodian.
treasurer
of
or
funds.
finance director?
The treasurer is the custodian of funds. The accountant is the one that actually monitors how things are spent, so it's a dual relationship.
Okay,
Technically,
because
the treasurer is the custodian of funds.
we just went through an entire exercise to reclaim monies that CPC had voted over a period of time, and that was done through the finance director. And any invoices that are gonna be done as of the 1st of January, no matter what the project is gonna go through the finance director's office for approval, for tracking.
Yes.
So that's why I asked that question.
It would follow the same process.
Okay,
And I forgot to point out that one change that was made to the trust statute last year, just so that you know as a CPC, is that any CPA funds that are transferred to the trust now is bound by the statute to report back to the CPC how they're allocating their funds. So what has happened over the years is that money's been transferred to the trust. A lot of trusts don't report that back to the CPC, then the CPC is not reporting it every year on the CP3 form to the Department of Revenue. So then there's a lot of money that's been transferred to trust, and we don't really know how it's been spent. So one change is now saying trusts have to report back every year at the end of the fiscal year before the September 15th filing. My office has created a fillable form that the trust can use that is prompting all the questions that the CPC needs with the CP3 form. But that now is a requirement that every year annually the trust has to report back to the CPC in time for the CPC to include it in the CP3 report.
okay.
So
Thank
that
you.
also means that we're telling every trust that you really need to monitor all your funds separately. You need to keep track of them separately. And that's just a good accounting practice anyways, because different funding sources have different restrictions. But specifically with CPA funds, now they have to make sure that they're tracking it separately, money that comes in as well as CPA money that goes out.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have. When this becomes an article going to town meeting floor, it's going to be presented from the administration, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay.
Most likely the selectmen.
The selectmen. The entity itself, whatever form it takes, in that article, is it going to be an inclusion that automatically 10% of the CPC money goes to the trust? Or is it going to be a request per year?
Yeah, I don't think we can legally do that. I think that.
So you'll still come back to the CPC for a request every year to put the 10%. Okay, I wasn't quite clear on that, reading all this documentation.
So as a CPC, you could, like Cambridge and Somerville, they use the public forum to get feedback from the community of what percent should go to which categories, and so they kind of decide a lot through that. And so the CPC could decide after hearing about that, and then decide, okay, 80%, Cambridge says, okay, we're gonna put 80% in housing. So that could be something that you do without requiring the trust to apply. It could be something that you just submit to the Board of Selectmen for the warrant every year. Or you could ask the trust to apply for that. But you could, as a trust, decide we're just going to transfer 5%, 10%, or whatever every year to the trust.
Okay, as a percentage of this 10%.
Or as a percentage of the yearly money that comes in, you could say 10% we're going to transfer. You could do it however you wanted, but you could do a percent without requiring them to apply every year.
Well, how does that affect the enabling legislation? It says 10% per unit.
10% per category, right.
Right.
So I'm just saying that as a CPC, you could decide every year that 10% is going to go to the trust.
Right, so my question again is, when you're talking about 80%, funding 80% of that, that's 80% of the 10%.
No,
That's not of the
no.
entire,
It's 80% of all the money every year that comes in Cambridge.
I still don't understand that.
Maybe to make it, some communities, like what was explained to me in Provincetown, is that they have the buckets, the same as we do, same CPC. They have such a large need for housing that they go and they make a decision by CPC that they're gonna take their full 10%, and then the 70% that's left over, that's in the undesignated bucket, that 60% of that, or whatever the number's gonna be, will all be dedicated for housing.
I understand that, but again, this is state legislation. So how do
The state
you
legislation
not?
only says the minimum. So the minimum is 10 for each of these categories. The maximum is 80 for
80?
any one. Yeah. You only have to do 10 for each. And so what Cambridge does is they put 10% in historic, 10% in open space recreation, and then they spend 80% in housing. They could do 80% in historic, but they designate it the way that they do. But it's not written into anything.
All right, so a
because
guidelines.
if they wanted to
It's a-
change it year to year, they can. So like Provincetown, I think that Provincetown at one point did more in housing, and I think they wanted to do more in historic, so it's not written into anything, it's an annual decision.
I think that Yarmouth, speaking with them, they go back to the CPC each year and kind of give an update and explain what they've done throughout the year, and then request the funds. So that's how the Yarmouth model works.
Joe,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hope I don't confuse, but on page 5 of the application, is that what you were getting to?
Probably.
And let me explain, what it says on that is 2017-18, $500,000 requested for fiscal year 19. And then fiscal years 20 and 21, you're looking for 10% allotted from CPA funds. That's what you're talking about,
That's the
correct?
intent.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kathy?
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand. So the trust, if it's formed, would be able to buy property without bringing it to town meeting?
That's, yeah.
Because right now taxpayers give a yay or nay as to whether we would purchase property, correct? Okay.
And that's part of the intent of how a trust is set up, so that the trust can be more nimble in the real estate market.
I
instead of
understand
having
that.
like-
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for coming in your presentation.
Thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, next, under old business, I'll wait for the secretary. Yep,
Give you a card? Sorry.
okay. At our last meeting, we were given a presentation and some documentation on the funding for the town and how the town interprets its priority list, essentially. I had reached out to the administration and asked for a priority list because of the number of applications. They came back, and it was a little more in-depth than I thought it would be. So I'd like the board to consider the following. At some point, we're gonna be voting these funding monies. We have applications in front of us. Each one of those applications is a department head from the town that has submitted it to the board with a number on it. Then we have the administration's recommendations as far as how they perceive their funding of that. So essentially, we're going to have to make a decision in the future about, do we fund the applications, or do we fund the amended, I don't know if you can call this an amended application. So it's just something to consider in the future, because in some of these, there's two different numbers.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So if I may, what you're saying on, as an example, on page 2, working up from the bottom where it says planning, when we just discussed, so housing trust, part-time housing coordinator, funding source CPC housing, if I read this right, the first column is what the administration's recommending, 295. 295 is what the capital outlay committee's recommending, but what was proposed
Proposed.
before us is the 500,000, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
I just want to make
Chris.
sure that, just to update, last time I was before you, I think it was November 15th, and the capital outlay had not finished going through. I did have, actually, they met just the other night, Tuesday night. We went through, and they did put their suggestions and recommendations. One of the things that I was advised of when I first started by the attorney is that the capital plan should include CPC items. So the CPC items are in here as a, I think I do have a separate column that you'll see, Board of Selectmen and CPC. So when you do your final recommendations, they'll be in there. One of the things also is that this is a plan that I use to recommend a balanced budget to the town. So I have, in some cases, split the funding from free cash and also what is available by CPC. But I think I was asked to prioritize, and that's what this is an effort to say. If I needed to put everything in and how do you balance it, this would be an approach to take to balance.
Questions? Kathy?
Oh, I forgot what I was gonna say. God. Could you clarify for me what the numbers, like 1A, 1B, 3B, what that column is there?
Yeah, we actually, in the forms for the capital budget, we ask people to prioritize. So when I go through, it's a higher level of priority. What I can provide to you is the actual forms, which has the attachments with what the codes mean. It's basically a prioritization.
Okay, because like when I look at this, it says that you equally support like every project in historic as equal prioritization. So I was just wondering if you, like, if I'm reading it correctly, and that you prioritize like the cemetery gravestone restoration as high as, say, the storage facility at the community center.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I
let
guess
me
that's
be-
not clear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because that is a little confusing. What the expectation is that, and I brought forms with me when I came here, was that each department, when they submit, the capital outlay committee wanted to see what the departmental prioritization was. So you do see a lot of 1As, because that's what the department submitted as their number one. So those are really within each category, in each department. So if you had a 1A and a 2A, then 2A is one that if I wasn't gonna fund it, that would be easier to defer. But it's really a department suggestion for multiple requests that they make, what they see as their priority that they present to capital outlay. This form covers a lot of different bases, so
Okay.
this is the capital outlay base.
So a 1B is
Would be a lesser priority.
a lesser priority. Okay. A lesser priority for
The
that
department.
particular department.
Correct.
But for you as town administrator, how
My
do you
My
prioritize
column is
these?
the town administrator recommendation. That's where I have my say.
But you've recommended pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So you haven't,
My job is to make sure we get
So-
things done.
right, I understand that. But we were kind of looking for a like I said, is the cemetery, I'm just using that as an example, is the cemetery gravestone restoration as important to be funded this fiscal year, given that we maybe have some constraints, as the storage facility, the public record storage facility? Just as an example.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I guess I took the approach, and I said this when I was before you before, that in the historic, as an example, that there's enough money to cover the projects. So are the projects in historic merited to warrant being allocated for money? And I think that those are. That's where I kind of was indicating that by bucket, by priority, this is what we're able to do. Historic, you still have $99,000 left in there with all the projects that are being requested. So I guess I recognize that the priorities of each individual department merit being funded.
And that'll be an issue that the board will discuss, and we'll make a decision on how.
Can I
Go
make
ahead,
another
Dan.
question? Chris, where there's no designation for a priority, what does that mean? Like, I'm looking at
Yeah, sometimes
conservation.
people did not submit it on the form.
Oh,
So
okay.
if
So
I
it-
didn't get the submission, I didn't make the assumption.
So, for example, under conservation, the Elridge Cornelius Pond property, under the funding source is designated as CP, open space, but there's no priority designation. That does not mean that they don't consider that a priority.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
I think on that one, I believe the Conservation Commission did vote it, support of that. But in that specific application, I did not receive an application as through the capital budget process. So I have to take the capital budget process and merge it with your process.
Okay.
So it was a priority that they had for their process.
Other,
Yeah, Chris, I think to get at a little bit of what I think Kathy was talking about, and something that I was sort of hoping for, which would have been a lot more simplistic, although this is extremely helpful, and I thank you for that, is you had given us this list a while ago, and I was wondering, and I thought that you were just going to come back to us with this list in priority order.
That would have been easy in some respects, but, I
It
think
may
where
have
you
been more
have,
difficult in other respects,
where you have
too.
pots of money,
Yeah,
and there's limits, I think it then makes sense to restrict where we don't have available
Right.
funds to do projects.
Right.
I mean, I can certainly do that. I hate to kind of hit one department versus another. I mean, the way I do the overall budget is I get all their requests and try to, I try not to be judgmental. So to me, cemetery and police, I shouldn't compete one against the other. I need to see, do I have sufficient funds to be able to meet those needs? Because from the department's perspective, it's a lot of work that goes into these.
oh, yeah,
They're
no,
not
I
gonna just do it
understand
on
that.
a whim. They're gonna
Yeah.
want these very seriously.
Right. And again, because we do have the pots of money, but again, the pots of money are minimums. And we do have additional money, so just because we have 10% in, in affordable housing, doesn't mean that we can't spend more than 10% in
Absolutely.
affordable housing.
Absolutely.
So, okay, thank you.
any other questions for the administrator?
Thank you.
Anything under other?
Any other what?
Anything under other? All right, next meeting, agenda points. Our next meeting is,
7th of December.
I'll say that loud, so,
It's next Thursday,
at what time?
December 7th, 6.
6,
And the agenda's already posted,
right?
so I'll send it out to you guys now.
Is there anything else? Motion to,
Adjourn?
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Done.
Aye.